Welcome to this screencast number 4. My name is Kasper Olsen. Will I introduce you to the ECM matrix. In the previous screencast, we saw the ECM model with the 7 related filters. It's also called the ECM funnel. Each filter represents a context, referred to as the ECM filters 0 through 6. The context of the ECM becomes more and more complex as it goes from the first to the 6th ECM filter. The main purpose of the ECM is to have a model for the structure of a health system that ensures that citizens with one or more severe chronic diseases get the best possible basis for supreme self-control and self-mastery combined with high-quality healthcare. The ideal is to reduce the patient role to a minimum and enhance the citizen role to a maximum. That means to give citizens with chronic illnesses real opportunities permanently to find themselves in a state of active and independent living. That is the first ECM filter. To the extent that this is not feasible in practice, then to offer the citizen support from health professionals when needed. This can be modulated successively from the 2nd ECM filter, representing pure virtual counseling and treatment, till the 6th ECM filter, the hospitalized patient. We now introduce the so-called ECM domains based in the ECM funnel, with various ECM filters that go from the 1st ECM filter to the 6th ECM filter. An ECM filter is a context that's composed of information from a number of subdomains. In this screencast, we must review the basic systematics of the ECM based on ECM filters and their corresponding domains constituting the ECM matrix. An ECM domain is a subject category, as in combination with the other ECM domains, they can describe an ECM filter in contextual detail using the necessary and relevant information about the person's condition, available services, actors and the organization, and the associated functionality of relevant equipment as a whole, which appropriately describe the overall situation, that is, context, in an individual ECM filter. It's important here to note that the ECM domains are described conceptually. It's important to understand the concepts behind each domain and thus the principles being used to describe a more and more comprehensive and complex context, as that goes from the 1st ECM filter through the 6th. The purpose of ECM domains is to ensure a consistent and systematic framework that can accommodate an exhaustive description of the different facets that are necessary to describe the context at an operational level for each ECM context filter. The ECM domains are non-exhaustive. It would be possible to add additional ECM domains in the future. We'll now take a look at the ECM funnel with the different filters again. ECM 1, Independent Active Living. ECM 2, Virtual Assisted Living. ECM 3, Virtual and Physical Assisted Living. ECM 4, Outmoded Living. ECM 5, Controlled Living. And finally ECM 6, Hospitalized Living. Each filter expresses the different contexts, that is, situational conditions which constitute one dimension of the ECM matrix. What we now need to look at is the other dimension of the ECM matrix, the one that contains the different ECM domains. We will in the following describe the fundamental aspects of the listed domains. Domain A is a condition domain. The condition domain comprises a conditional model that enables an overall condition conclusion in terms of a traffic light color, based on a number of underlying information elements, which are typically generated from self-monitoring data. The condition model is typically based on a set of operating parameters that are relevant for a chronic condition, for example, lung function of COPD and asthma, blood sugar for diabetes, and depression score for bipolar disorders. It may also be data collected as so-called PROM schemes, patient-reported outcome measures. In the condition domain, you'll often find algorithms that generate a traffic light color for the overall condition conclusion based on the underlying data set for the relevant chronic condition the individual person at hand has. In this way, one obtains an easy way to visualize whether the person is in his habitual condition or whether there's an acute or subacute deterioration. See context change from ECM 1 to ECM6. Domain B is a service domain. The service domain contains information on processes. Processes are different kinds of activities that are relevant to the ECM context. Processes can be described on an atomic level, for example a blood sample or an FEV1 measurement. It can also be composed of services which can partly be performed by the citizen himself, or empowerment and advisory service in ECM1, as well as services provided by health professionals in connection with adjacent complications and acute deteriorations, which are becoming more and more intensive as the ECM context moves to the right. Domain C is a plan and guideline domain. This domain contains the information that constitutes the dynamic plan, which in ECM1 is aligned with the person's habitual condition and associated relevant instructions. As the context moves towards the right, as a result of more or less serious deteriorations, the plan adapts to the current situation by adding relevant acute interventions, which the responsible healthcare professional prescribes. The main objective is to return the context back to ECM1 as quickly as possible. Domain D contains information on the ECM network of actors and their organizational affiliation, that is, their roles and relationships. The citizen role is dominant in ECM1, as well as related advisory and supportive professional roles in the form of healthcare coach, pharmacist, dietitian, etc. As that context moves to the right, the citizen role becomes more and more the patient role, which is dominant in ECM6, where the citizen is hospitalized and treated by the healthcare staff at the hospital. Domain E contains information on requirements for the person's geographic location, for example expressed as GPS coordinates. In ECM 1 to 2, the person can be fully mobile and is supported by the ECM network. In ECM 3 to 4, the person must be at home to become ECM supported, and in ECM 5 and 6, the citizen becomes admitted at the local municipality clinic, which is ECM 5, or finally at the hospital, which is ECM 6. Domain F includes the applied ICT and related things as different types of objects used by the different actors of the ECM network. In ICM1, the primary content is the eHealth box, with a health navigator, measuring devices and an emergency medicine box. In the following ECM filters, other ICT systems used by health professionals can be seen. These 6 domains contain information that should be traceable to the level of the individual person. When combining information elements across domains, it will be possible to model the overall context of ECM1 to ECM6 on the level of an individual person. Therefore, it's necessary that all the information is placed in one database so that the various ECM applications can operate across domains. For example, to dynamically updating an individual planning for a person with an acute exacerbation. Each domain must have its own conceptual model, that is, there must be a condition model, a process model, a planning model, an actor and organization model, a geographic model, and an equipment model. All these models will contain instances of primary data, which additionally will give rise to secondary data, serving purposes like decision support and higher order interpretations of conditions. Finally, the last ECM domain will be presented, Domain G, Population Management. This domain uses only data secondarily, that is, data recorded individually in the other domains is processed and displayed on an aggregated level. This includes functions and features that primarily serve managerial and research-oriented aspects. When we look at the ECM matrix from an overall point of view, it appears that the context view provides comprehensive, relevant information about the current situation in the individual ECM filters. This is also characterized as the ECMS phenotypes. However, If we choose to regard ECM matrices based on its ECM domains, this view is not necessarily meaningful, but it contains meta-information characterizing the potential of the ECM. Accordingly, we call the ECM domains the ECM genotypes. Put another way, you can classify the different domains of context level of the ECM model into the individual cells of the ECM matrix. Looking at the ECM matrix rows, you typically see a summative property when going from left to right. This means that the elements in a given cell also exist in the adjacent cell when going to the right. If, for example, going from cell 2D to 3D, the number of possible categories of actors in 2D are also found in 3D, which has additional categories of actors. Generally, you can say that when you go from left to right in a domain, the resource types become more and more comprehensive. Looking at the ECM matrix vertical rows, this is an example of creating a meaningful and fair context across domains. Consistency is crucial here. With this at hand, a data-driven interpretation can be achieved. This can be done partly algorithmically and partly through successful visualization mechanisms that create the desired overview and derived decision support. We'll look at this in the following. We'll now look at the interaction between the ECM service domain and plan and guide domain. We'll look at the mechanism that translates relevant service types contained in the service domain to a person's individual plan included in the ECM domain C, plan and guide, in what we call jobs to be done or services to be carried out. In the capital region of Denmark, this case management program applies for COPD. It's a kind of guideline or instruction that contains a cross-sectorial description of the services of general practitioners, municipal and hospital employees, and health professionals, which they must adopt in relation to the treatment of the COPD population of the capital region. The COPD case management program is included in the ECM domain C, plan and guide. The COPD case management program is a comprehensive document which is difficult to use in practice. Therefore, it's important that the COPD case management program descriptions can be transformed into a digital format, which can be used and executed in the ECM. We want, in other words, to reshape the COPD case management program description into a COPD service catalog, which contains all the COPD health services in a digitally executable format to be included within the ECM domain B, services. The levels of descriptions for the ECM service domain includes a total of 4 granulations levels, where level 1 contains a comprehensive COPD service catalog, which may be subdivided in elective and acute services. If we take the first service, diagnosing and inclusion, we can see in the next granulation level what sub-activities it consists of. If we choose from this list objective examination, we see what this service consists of in greater detail. If we further need to have accurate information about what the underlying data definitions are, we can move to granulation level 4. Here we find precise meta-information on definitions and associated rules and related criteria for data use. This was an overall exemplification of the ECM domain B, the service domain within the COPD area. Note that a service is always assigned to a status that can be finalized, can be in progress, or be planned. An important link between a service and a plan is via the status property. This we'll look at in the next slide. Here is an illustration introducing a patient with multimorbidity. The e-doctor is in the process of examining a person in an inclusion examination. And it turns out that the person, in addition to COPD, also suffers from type 2 diabetes. In order to put together a plan for this person, the e-doctor now unfolds the service catalogs for COPD, type 2 diabetes and the catalog of empowerment. Based on a time horizon of 12 months, various relevant services are planned, discussed and agreed upon in collaboration with the person at hand. Hereby an individual plan, my plan, is constructed. The first service is the initial consultation and examination, which includes diagnosing, stratification, etc., as well as other measures in order to become ECM connected. A smoking cessation course is planned, which is chosen from the COPD service catalog and is specified to be started up within the next month. A month later, a consultation with a health coach is scheduled, and after this a pulmonary rehabilitation course is planned. Due to his diabetes, an ophthalmoscopy examination at the eye doctor is also planned. After a 6-month schedule, a clinical control examination is planned, called a follow-up visit. A diet consultation has already been planned, as well as the opportunity to participate in an ECM community network, and a clinical control at the end of the 12-month period. This plan is made up of combined standardized services that conform with the person's specific multimorbidity profile with COPD and type 2 diabetes. Note further that this plan is composed of elective services. It does not take into account the person's day-to-day variation and subsequent acute and subacute crises. We'll look at this now. We'll now look at how we can use the ECM matrix domains and context to describe an acute deterioration process in which an ECM-connected person is initially in his habitual condition with COPD. The next thing that happens is an acute exacerbation, which means that the person's plan, my plan, is now updated by an acute treatment plan, which requires a series of acute services. This defines a coherent acute treatment which ends up with the person's return into his habitual condition ECM1. To describe all the aspects of this deterioration, it requires that we handle information from the first 6 ECM domains: A. Condition, B. Service, C. Plan and guide, D. Actors, E. Geography, and F. Information technology and things. Let's first look at how the process presents itself without using the ECM matrix explicitly. Let's look at a description of the context and the associated events chronologically. Here we have Eve. She's in a habitual condition as shown by her own condition measurements. She's the ECM1, active and independent living. The following day she feels a little unwell and is a little beside herself. Her condition measurement is now yellow as her lung function is slightly lower than normal. She presses the contact button on her health navigator and gets immediate contact with an RCC nurse. The RCC nurse can see she's a little paler than she is normally, and the nurse instructs her to make a new condition measurement and contact the RCC immediately if she gets worse. Next morning when Eve wakes up, she feels really bad. Her temperature has increased to 38 degrees and she has stained sputum. Her lung function is further decreased. Her health navigator now shows a red color for her condition. 5 minutes after, she receives a call from the RCC nurse, who immediately reacted on a new state of deterioration. The RCC nurse talks with Eve, and in combination with the clinical impression based on the video conference, she is confirmed in her suspicion of an acute exacerbation. The RCC nurse therefore immediately contacts the e-doctor, and after a brief review of the situation, he finds that Eve must start up a severe exacerbation treatment using medicine from her acute medicine box. He prescribes the treatment in her ECM record, including medical treatment with antibiotics, corticosteroids and inhaled bronchodilators. In addition, the RCC nurse is instructed to contact the citizen daily for the next 5 days and, if necessary, be ready to send a mobile emergency team nurse to Eve's home if the treatment does not begin to have an effect during the next day. And Eve can of course contact RCC at any time. Note that Eve's ECM context has now shifted from ECM1, active and independent living, to ECM2, assisted living. Next day in the morning, Eve's condition measurement remains red because the condition is unchanged. Eve contacts RCC via its one point of contact video conference on her health navigator and talks with the RCC, which concludes on the current situation not to start up new treatments but wait a little bit. The RCC instructs Eve to make a new measurement in the evening. During the day, Eve feels that she gets worse and her condition measurement of the evening is still red and her temperature has now risen from 38 to 39. She contacts the RCC again, which after a brief discussion with an e-doctor sends a mat nurse to Eve's home. The mat nurse shows up in Eve's home 1 hour later and she investigates Eve clinically, measures her lung function, blood pressure and pulse, and takes a series of blood tests including measurements of her infection parameters and documents all the results in the ECM record with the e-doctor. Then reads and discusses the results with the mat nurse. The mat nurse's results confirm that Eve has pneumonia, but her infection parameters are not alarmingly high. The overall clinical impression is therefore to await developments over the next 12 hours, which is agreed upon by Eve. Take note that by the MAT involvement, the ECM context for Eve has now increased from ECM2 to ECM3. The next morning she's doing a little better and her condition measurement has become yellow. Therefore she agrees with the RCC that the treatment will be continued as planned. Note that Eve's ECM context now shifts from ECM3 to ECM2 as the MAT involvement in Eve's course of treatment now stops. That evening her condition measurement shows a green color, so it bodes well as Eve goes to bed in the evening on the third day of treatment after having a short contact with the RCC over the video conference. But when she wakes up in the morning, her lung function has deteriorated. Her condition measurement now shows a yellow color, and therefore she agrees with the RCC that she must now take some bronchodilating medicine from her acute medicine box, which fortunately quickly shows a positive effect. A few hours later, measuring Eve again, she now has a green color. Once more, she has a short contact with the RCC nurse, who expresses satisfaction with the development of Eve's health condition. Here, on the fourth day of the acute treatment course, the RCC nurse instructs Eve to measure her lung function the next morning. For the first time in 4 days, she gets a good night's sleep without shortness of breath. The day after, her condition measurement shows a green color, and after a brief contact with the RCC nurse, they agree that Eve just needs to follow the medical treatment as prescribed by the e-doctor, despite the fact that she now has returned to her habitual condition, active and independent living. Eve's case is an illustration of how the ECM model's different context filters describe the various situations of an acute treatment course in a clinically meaningful way based on repetitive condition assessments, coordination and execution of interventions in the clinical team, and the support of Eve's participation in the whole process. Let's now look at how the ECM domains can be used to describe various relevant details in this acute treatment course. The overall context is set here at the top from the different filters of the ECM funnel. The context fluctuates between ECM1, independent living, and ECM2, assisted living, and with peak in ECM3 when the MAT nurse examines Eve in cooperation with the e-doctor and then retires from the process again, and subsequently the ECM context goes back to ECM2 for finally ending in Eve's habitual condition in the ECM1. When we then describe it, putting together the specific context of this process, we can see that Eve herself, obviously, is an ECM actor. And because she actively does something, she co-produces some ECM services. She is able to self-monitor her condition appropriately, communicate with the RCC, carry out proactive actions such as using her PEP whistle, and take her prescribed medication as instructed by the RCC. We can furthermore see that there are two kinds of health professional actors, respectively the RCC nurse and the e-doctor. They also carry different tasks and services out. The RCC nurse monitors and follows Eve continuously. She contacts and advises her and assesses her clinical condition. The e-doctor is drawn into the loop by the RCC nurse and ensures and takes responsibility for concluding and prescribing medication and follow-ups in the acute treatment. All this is highly dependent on Eve's own condition measurements, but we did not see her treatment plan and how it was dynamically and continuously adapted to the situation. We'll look at that in the following. We now present a timeline that basically runs between past, present and future. The present always represents the actual decision and the relevant information from the past in order to plan the future. We'll now look at 4 quadrants, which we'll characterize in the following. Let us initially classify the 2 ECM domains, A, health and health services, and B, condition conclusions. Let us then classify the 2 ECM domains, G and C here. Thereby we separate 4 different categories of information types in the 4 quadrants. The actual measured health conditions in the left lower quadrant, the performed processes and services in the left upper quadrant, objectives or problems of health in the lower right quadrant, and the individualized plan in the upper right quadrant, expressed as scheduled services. In this setup, the mechanism is followed by generating an ongoing update of an individual plan. 1. What is actually done? What processes and services have been done? 2. What is the person's health condition? In this analysis, it's possible to use all present data needed to understand and diagnose the relevant problems. 3. A formulation of objectives for the health condition and problems to be solved. Once this is clear, you're ready to update the individual plan. Conceptually, this makes good sense, but in practice it's impossible to carry out in a documented way unless the process is distinctly supported by data, and even better, data-driven. This means that it's necessary to have an underlying information system to manage these processes in a consistent, clinically meaningful and proper way. This is, in fact, the main purpose of the ECM. Let's now look at how the 4 quadrants look in Eve's case, where we saw an acute deterioration. Here's Eve's plan, which contains the services carried out in the left upper quadrant. Note here that the planned pulmonary rehabilitation was not carried out because the course was cancelled by the municipality. We also have an overview of her self-measured condition over time, which is more or less fine. On this basis, 3 goals for Eve have been defined. Because of her diabetes, her hemoglobinia A1C should be below 8. It has long been too high, so it must be coped with. Secondly, her FEV1, the measure for her lung function, must not fall below 1.2. A smoking cessation course is relevant for her, but personally, Eve's most important goal is to achieve the energy to leave her apartment and attend the nearest shopping center to see the Christmas show there in 3 months from now. She was not down there last year, but is working to achieve this goal. Therefore, she needs empowerment. Finally, we here have a future plan which contains appointments with the eye doctor, a clinical control with her general practitioner, etc. Then comes her acute exacerbation. Initially, it's not that bad as her condition is only yellow. In this context, she contacts the RCC nurse. Her request can be characterized as an acute request. At this time, it's not decided if an acute treatment must be initiated, but increased awareness is turned on at the RCC. This means that her normal plan is put on hold. This also applies for her goals in relation to her habitual condition. Instead, there's full awareness on the risk of developing an acute exacerbation. The next condition measurement confirms the deterioration and an urgent exacerbation treatment course is launched. This means that her former normal plan is on hold and everything is now about how to make an acute plan which will get her back in her habitual condition. Only when this has happened will the plan be updated along with her normal goals. When the acute exacerbation treatment course is completed satisfactorily, we can now see this indicated in the left upper quadrant. The job is done. Even her healthcare professionals can once again focus on her normal goals when she is in a habitual condition. Finally, her individual plan is updated with a pulmonary rehabilitation course, which will not be cancelled this time. Finally, we shall look again at the ECM matrix with an embedded timeline. First, we see the timeline here. Her acute exacerbation and associated treatments are now over, and we now partly look back on what happened and also look ahead using the ECM matrix. Here we see all the information systematized in the various ECM domains, so we gradually see and understand the context and the shift through Eve's exacerbation course. It would lead too far to explain in detail the underlying model for condition measurement. It's sufficient to note that in the displayed setup, the data of parameters relevant for lung function are measured and recorded. This data is algorithmically being converted to a traffic light color. The ECM model can accommodate other chronic condition models with other types of conditions. We'll talk about this in a later screencast. In the ECM-B, the so-called service domain, we can see what services have been carried out and which ones are planned. Note that the number of service types increase as the context goes from ECM1 to ECM3. The illustrated services are not exhaustive but illustrative. A later screencast on the implementation of the Epital in the municipality of Lyngby-Taarbæk will show which service types are being used here, and they'll be explained in greater detail. This also applies to the content in the following domains. There's the ECM domain C, Plan and Guide. We here see a shift from a habitual plan to an emergency treatment plan, which reverts to the habitual plan as the condition becomes normalized again. In its basic structure, the plan is made up of scheduled services, when they need to be performed, and by whom. Next, there's the ECM domain D, the actors. Here we see what actors have actively participated in Eve's acute course of treatment and who's planned to do something for Eve in the near future. Then there's the ECM domain E, geography. We can see that Eve has been at home during the entire process. We can further see that Eve has planned to go to Thailand, where it'll be possible also to treat her if she were to get a new acute deterioration, but only up to the ECM2 context, which is pure virtual treatment. Finally, the ECM domain F shows which systems, remedies and medications have been used. In conclusion, you can say that the ECM contains a framework of information types which, consistently used, can identify the various items of information, including the person's health status, the services carried out, and the dynamic plan, as well as the actors involved, what they do and when. Overall, the Epital care model represents a basic model for a health system that is fundamentally designed to be personalized. This includes motivating the participating person to be in sovereign self-control, connected to a surrounding virtual healthcare system that operates on this premise. Maximum support for the e-citizen when needed in order to facilitate individual sovereign self-control of their own health and to ensure proactive support by health professionals when the health condition deteriorates. This will be done through a stepwise response from the surrounding healthcare system, the personalized e-healthcare system. In a following screencast, we'll discuss ways of transforming the existing healthcare system we know today towards the personalized e-healthcare system. This will be done based on experiences from the innovation arena of the Epital, a kind of living lab, established in the municipality of Lyngby-Taarbæk. Furthermore, we'll offer a practical illustration of the application of the ECM domains in the innovation arena of the Epital. Thanks for listening.